Well, welcome. It's Friday. Here we are again. We've made it through another week, folks. I know I'm supposed to be speaking in a non-timeless manner, and everything is evergreen, and all these other things I've been learning about. You know, the medium we're using now, and don't make it date specific. I don't care. It's Friday, folks, and we can edit the head off of this, and we'll make it evergreen again sometime. But here we are. We've made it. We're into a new season. It's summertime here in Chicago for me. It's sunny. I look outside and I feel hopeful. Sometimes we can get a little down when we look at the news. We look at the challenges ahead, but then Karl shows up. And I'm all positive again because I'm talking gear, and when I'm talking gear, I feel like I'm going to work, and that's a good thing. But today's topic is we're pretty focused today. Today is about the D-Squared Digital Wireless from Lectrosonics, and talking about that receiver and really that deep dive we talked about so many times. Pete and Mac, we this show has kind of got a little squirrel action to it. As soon as we see a squirrel, we look over there and we kind of follow down that track, or the shiny objects. We're not
Exactly.
really good about that sometimes, but today is really about the focus is around this product, around understanding. And I think everybody who's on with us today, you'll walk away with a lot of understanding about digital wireless as well, right? Because those principles. But the idea here is let's dig in. Let's really understand how this system works. The features, a lot of times that in the field we don't get a chance to really dive into, because frankly we're trying to get on the air, or we're trying to get our show in. And up until COVID happened, we were basically learning gear in the field. When it showed up, they said, here's your kit, enjoy. Right. And we've had a really good fortune during this downtime to really learn to start understanding equipment. And I would challenge everybody, take this time to read those manuals, understand it, because man, when we get back in the field, it's going to be fast and furious. I know some people are there already, and they would attest to this, that it's fast, it's furious. And before we go any further, Pete, Mac, it's great to see you. Um, we're moving on. What episode are we on today?
73.
73. Yeah. And Karl,
Not that anybody's counting, but
not that anybody's counting, correct? But
Somebody's counting.
Karl was with us Monday on 71 around the location sound. That was huge,
it's
man.
been only 99 days since we started this process.
Here we are.
Incredible.
99 days, 73. I'm not great with math. That's why I'm leaving that to the bright engineers in the industry. But I think we're going to have some good questions. I've already started formulating a few myself. Handouts. We got a handout in there. The links for the manual, and then the YouTube videos that specifically around encryption and around diversity operation. Make sure you grab that handout, follow those links after the show, because Karl's going to talk about that. But, I didn't get a chance to join you folks for all of the location sound that day. Pete, Mac, what were your thoughts that day with John and with Chris?
Pete, I was working.
Yes, exactly. And I thought it was a terrific show, and the fact that it was about the film process was totally new to me, and I love that whole aspect of it, because it's a different world. You see film crews working totally different than we do in the theater and entertainment industry, and it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think it really points to that interdisciplinary that we're starting to see. I've had a few conversations this week with different folks saying, you know what, the location thing got me thinking about how do we apply that to these remote broadcasts and to these remote events now, where those location sound folks in their carts and the systems they have set up, How brilliant is that? We have,
Yep.
oh, look at that. We have 1, 2 people on this end, and the getting it right. The old not waiting on sound kind of thing. So today isn't necessarily about specifically location sound, but I think we're going to see with Karl a lot of examples of how the D-Squared Wireless, those functions, how they apply across all these different disciplines, whether it's live event sound, whether it's broadcast, whether it's location sound for film, for TV. These feature sets have all developed from those needs. I mean, Electro is one of the, I'm sorry to shorten your name. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but that's how I think, right? And Electro's always been that leader in, if you think of ruggedness, if you think of feature sets, if you think of what's the next thing coming, right? Electro's always been right there out at the front of the pack leading that. So very much appreciate that, Karl, and your engineering team. You guys are doing some great work. It's a lot of work. It's hard building stuff, isn't it?
It absolutely is. If you haven't been in the manufacturing business, you have no idea how difficult and challenging it can be. You know, we're fortunate to have some excellent competitors, you know, and all of us work real hard to focus on the user's needs and, you know, outdo each other. It's kind of leapfrog. It's an arms race in many ways. And so there's really, this is the time that you see the best products ever available. They're available now. You know, and we've got a long tradition of working closely with film, television production, news crews, and all that. So like you said, some of our feature sets and form factors are based around portability, small size, DC powered, you know, and things like that. Ruggedness, of course, you know, for work out in the field where it's not as much of a controlled environment. So that's kind of our background, you know, dating back to, let's say, the mid 80s when we got real serious about wireless. And getting into the late 80s, we're already all over the news with our portable receivers like the CR185 VHF unit. You know, that there's still those things out there. I mean, they were made very well by the teams at the time. So yeah, I really enjoy working with our engineering team and talking with the customers like Chris Alland, who we had on the show Monday, and we're lucky to get Chris. I mean, he's a top level mixer working in Hollywood and working on some big pictures with some big directors and TV series and everything like that. So he was great to talk to. I mean, I love seeing his behind the scenes pictures. So if you haven't seen that show, anyone who's watching, go back and look at that archive. It was posted just a couple days ago, and Chris really brings some cool stuff to the table. So it was fun to have him and fun to be involved with that.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, P, and Mac, let's talk about questions for a second, because I think, you know, this is, since we're very focused today on this product, let's kind of talk through just, you know, how that question sings and this kind of the specificity, because I think we're going to want to be able to go back to that and find when people had those questions. So let's just, I know that people probably know this, but let's just do a quick review, because I'm already going to be making my notes. So.
Geez, I thought you were going to steal my thunder.
No, never. Man.
He was starting to. It was almost going to happen.
Close, and I'm like, no. I'm out of my jurisdiction.
So most of you, I'm sure, have heard this speech 71 times, and we're going to do it again. So as you know, we try to answer every question you have. We encourage questions. Their questions are what make this all work. But because of what Kelly just mentioned, that the question may not be answered in the moment you asked it, please be very specific about what you ask, so that if we go back 5 minutes previously to refer to a question, we'll know what you were referring to and what the context was. The same goes for comments. If you're making comments, please be specific so we understand the context, because, you know, looking back at it tomorrow when we're rereading stuff, we'll have no idea. We will try to get to every question. If we can't get to every question, we will at least try to cover every topic. There's often multiple questions on a topic. So if your name doesn't get mentioned, don't feel bad. We're going to try and get your questions answered, and that's the important part. And I also am looking forward to this, because I think I was first exposed to Lectrosonics mics, I don't know, 20 years ago. Somehow the numbers 2020 and 400 pop into my mind, but I don't know I know those were products. I don't know if those are the ones I'm talking about. It was a handheld mic that had an EQ inside under the windscreen. So
The UT type, yeah. In fact, we still make a version of that. The UT type had a fixed capsule, which was, of course, to many people's chagrin. They wanted to be able to change the capsule. But if you took the grill off, inside there was a tiny little 3-band EQ, you know, a low shelf, a mid sweep, and then a high shelf, as well as attenuation, which could be handy for really hot sources since it was a condenser element.
I think that was my first exposure to Lectrosonics mic, and I was doing support for VH1's Storytellers, and I don't know whether someone had requested that mic or if it was for an announcer. Don't remember the actual usage, but it had to go into wedges, and I went over and I was testing it in the wedges, and it was just like, what the hell? I mean, I was just blown away that it sounded like a wired mic. It didn't sound.
Yep.
There was no RF artifacts. It sounded like I was talking into a good quality wired mic, and
that's the idea.
I was blown away. So I'm looking forward to continuing to see some of your current new products.
Absolutely. Well, you know, just to dovetail on that, that's always been our approach. We're a wireless company. You know, I think many manufacturers have come at this from being microphone manufacturers, which is totally, of course, great. And I used to work for one. I worked for Sennheiser for many years. But Lectrosonics doesn't make mics. We make wireless. And so our concentration's always been on making whatever mic you're using sound like that mic and as neutral as possible and open. And so we put a lot of effort into that part of the link. And, you know, that's still what we're doing today. So I'm glad you had a good experience way back. And I did too. I mean, before coming here. Yeah. It's we're a small company. We're a fraction of the size of the big guys, and everything's made in our factory here in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. We employ about 150 people. Everything's made on-site machine shop, plastic injection molding, electronic surface mount, all that stuff. So we love having factory visits. Of course, now's not a great time for things like that, but we do have a video on our YouTube page with the factory tour showing you kind of how the products are made. So check that out if you haven't already. But we're very proud of that.
Absolutely.
I think we should let you get with it.
Well, that was exactly my experience about Electro as well. And back when Mac and I worked together with theater technology, we had a bunch of Electro and absolutely loved it. It was always reminded me of Motorola walkie-talkies that were so rugged you could use them to hammer a nail with, you know, and all of the Electro stuff. It's just solid pieces of metal. And I'm eager to get in. We'll let Karl get started. I want to tease everybody a little bit about this new product here. I'm not going to tell you anything about it now, but at the end of the show, I'll tell you what it is, and it's very unique.
Awesome.
So there, Karl,
already.
I can't get you a better introduction than that. No, seriously, we can't. This is what we do. So, but thanks for joining us today, and you know, we'll click off here and start taking us through the product, and we'll be ready with our questions and anybody else's.
Yep. Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here, and great to see everybody out there. So one thing you mentioned, Kelly, that I wanted just to expand upon a tiny bit. You mentioned now's a great time to read manuals. You know, honestly, there's many times that we wonder, why do we spend all this time on our manuals? Because it seems like no one ever reads them. And of course, no one ever has time because everyone's working and going a million miles an hour. But we've got wonderful manuals that we really do spend a lot of time on. And we get into a lot of details in there and put all kinds of great picture diagrams and everything. So please feel free to check those out. If you're a Lectrosonics user or if you're thinking about doing it, those manuals are a fantastic resource. So those are all, of course, available on the website. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Let me get into the product itself. So the D-Squared wireless system was introduced just about a year ago for the Infocom show last year in 2019. And we got an immediate, very good reaction to it. The cornerstone of the product, of course, is the receiver, and it's 4 channels and a half rack space, digital receiver, but backwards compatible with our digital hybrid series that we've been making now for almost 20 years. So it's very flexible just on that alone. And we were talking in the pre-show about encryption. We'll get into some details there. It has AES 256-bit CTR mode encryption, which is the gold standard. And we've got 3 different key management modes or key policies available. So we'll get into some of that. The receiver is compatible also with the Duet series units, which means that it can pick up a carrier with a stereo signal on it, not just mono signal. So it's got some flexibility there. So it can pick up signals from an M2T rack transmitter for the Duet series and the DCHT. So I'm going to be showing you all the different transmitters here in a minute. And of course, Ethernet for control. So that's the receiver system. And I'm going to show you the back panel and the front panel and get into the menus here in a minute. But I just want to give you the overview of this product line. So let's talk first about transmitters. There's really 3 digital transmitters available in the D-Squared line and 1 variant. So to start out, let me show you the one that I forgot to bring with me, but I'm going to show you on the screen here. This is the DHU handheld transmitter, and it's you mentioned the old UT with the variable EQ in the capsule, and we do make 2 capsules for this product. The HHC is just a cardioid condenser head that threads on, and then the HHVMC has that 3-band EQ like what you were talking about. So if you really need to customize the capsule right at the front end, that's the way to do that. So this transmitter style we've been making for almost 10 years now, starting with the HH transmitter. And this one looks almost identical, other than down here in the foot, you can see that it's got a gray cap instead of blue. So that tells you that it's digital as opposed to digital hybrid. This has got all the features in it that our other transmitters do. And one of the keys, as I kind of mentioned, was that it's got a thread-on capsule that is the same as the Shure and EV thread forms, which have been around for many years, at least 20 years that I know of. And so there's just a whole plethora of capsules available out there for this transmitter. One of the cool things about it is that it has a multifunction button on the back that can be set up as the power button or push to talk, which is a very handy feature and was much requested by location sound guys who want to use this as an on-set VOG mic. They call it a voice of God. If the director wants to talk to everybody on the set, they can just pick this thing up, push the button, talk, set it down, and it's quiet. And so that's a handy feature. It's also got a cough function. If you have got someone who wants to just duck for a second, they push the button and it mutes it. It's got a latching mute and then talk back. And I'm going to get more into talk back here in a few minutes, but the idea here is if you push that button when it's in talkback mode, it routes the audio out of a different channel of the receiver. So all these things are in this transmitter and most of the transmitters in this line. So I'll show you a couple of the others. But there is the multifunction button right on the back, and it's got a tactile sort of soft click that you can feel. This unit runs on AA batteries, and there's a battery removal lever that makes changing batteries really quick. Also, the control panel where you would do most of your programming is hidden when the unit is closed. So it's basically impossible to change the settings without opening it up. And that multifunction button here, if you want to bypass it altogether, you can do that as well. So the fidelity of this one here, and the entire D-Squared line, it's 24-bit, 48 kilohertz sample rate, and transmitting that over the air, and it sounds just absolutely fantastic. Whatever capsule you like, this thing sounds really, really good. We've heard a bunch of great compliments on it for those that have tried it. So, you can put your favorite capsule on there. Now, the Sennheiser units use a different thread form, but we have an adapter called the HH2 Sen that will adapt the Sennheiser Evolution and 2000 series capsules onto the DHU and the HHA and HH previous units. So if that's your favorite capsule series, you can get that on there as well. But there's just a ton of different capsules made for that thread form. Here's the Earthworks that's popular with some folks as well. So that's the handheld transmitter. So the next one, of course, and always the mainstay of our line is going to be the belt pack type units. This is the DBU. It's the digital belt pack unit. And you mentioned the ruggedness of the Lectrosonics. These are a perfect example. They're still milled out of a billet material, aluminum alloy, and then plated with a super hard, scratch resistant plating. These units, the belt pack units got a multifunction switch on it, similar to that button on the handheld units. And this can be set up to be the power on off as I have it set up now. It can be a talkback switch or a mute switch. So some flexibility built into the transmitters, including the belt pack units. And this is just included right with the unit. There's no extra to pay to have like a talkback function or anything like that. So let's see here. Then I want to show you the newest member of the D-Squared line, and that is the the DPR. This is the plug-on unit. Of course, plug-on units have been in our line for a very long time. This is one of our most popular products. This is the latest version of that, now fully digital. Let me get it turned around the right way. Again, 24-bit, 48 kilohertz sample rate, and sounds fantastic. We had great reactions from the beta testers, and now the first folks that have bought these and are using them are letting us know how happy they are with the sound, particularly very low noise floor, and that gives you a fantastic dynamic range for boom mic work, which is one of the more popular things that's done with our plug-on transmitters for film production sound. But a little side business, in a sense, for us for many years now, maybe 15 or so years, has been with what we call the TM400 system. This is using a plug-on transmitter and a calibrated mic to set up and align your sound system. And what this gives you the ability to do, of course, is to not have to run long cables when you're doing this alignment using something like Smart or some of the other programs that do sound system alignment. So this latest one, of course, is going to give you an even flatter response. It's about 25 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and excellent phase response as well, which isn't always the case. And of course, with no compander, as we've long had that in our line, you're not going to have interaction with the dynamics. So something like this with the DSQD receiver, which I'm going to show you in great detail here in a minute, would make a fantastic TM400. In fact, we'll probably package this up and call it the TM400D. So imagine having 4 of these with 1 DSQD and a rack for a sound system alignment, giving you a chance to take 4 points simultaneously with no cables, and the fidelity to be just phenomenal. Also, the latency of this system is 1.4 milliseconds, which is a little bit, it's about half of our older hybrid series. So there's less compensation that you would have to do in alignment, especially for timing. So then another unique feature of this unit is that it has a slot for a micro SD card. If you wanted to use this unit for a recorder or a transmitter, you make that choice in the menu. And then the other port here is actually your time code jam sync port, which is something, of course, for film production. So you would have a master time code source and then jam sync this unit. It's got a temperature compensated crystal, so its accuracy is less than 1 part per million. So that's like a day's long worth of shooting without drifting even a single frame. So that's all built into this unit. It runs on AA's, as most of our units do. And it would run for about 4 or 5 hours on some AA's. This unit provides phantom power for your microphones at 5 volts for like a lav mic, 15 volts for some mics, and then 48 volts for your typical boom mics or calibration mics. So a lot built into this unit. It's called the DPR, and it is available now, although demand has outstripped supply, which often happens when products are new. I don't think we have any on the shelf at the moment, but dealers do have a few of these, and we've got another production run coming out next month. So keep your eyes open for that. So that is the transmitters. And if anyone has questions, now I mentioned before that this thing is backwards compatible with the digital hybrid units. So for instance, the tiny little SSM that's popular for theaters as an example, and some TV productions, and just anywhere, TV like The Weather Girl, anything where you need it to be really small and concealable. So this is a digital hybrid unit, but it is compatible with the D-Squared system. And also the stereo transmitters like the DCHT. This is designed for like camera hop use or IFB transmission from a bag or a portable system. And it takes analog or AES inputs. It's digital transmission, 2 channels of audio on a single RF carrier. So in terms of camera hops and IFB, you can save the number of carriers by sending 2 channels over a single carrier and then picking them off with your portable receivers. But the DSQD can pick up signals from the DCHT as well. So that kind of shows the cross compatibility between the Duet systems and the D-Squared system.
We did
Peter,
have one little question about
okay.
that handheld mic adapter.
Yes.
That adapt for the KMS 104, 105 Sennheiser mics as well?
It is not. This is for the 2000 series and G3, G4 type Sennheiser mics, but there is an adapter made by Ambient Recording in Germany. And I forget the exact name of it, but I think it's HHA or something like that. And it is for the 5000 series type Sennheiser heads, including the KMS 105. And I've used it myself. It works very, very well. There's a voltage selector switch in there between 7 and 11 volts or something to optimize depending on the capsule. But yeah, it's very svelte, very small unit. I'm not sure how much it costs, but Ambient Recording from Germany makes it.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Okay, so I'd like to start talking about the receiver, and I'm going to switch screens. Or I'm going to switch cameras so I can show the unit itself, starting with the back of the unit. So let me move this real quickly over here, and we'll get see my makeshift studio here. All right, let's switch cameras real quick. All right, so now I'm focusing on the rear of the unit because this is, of course, in many ways the business end of this product. But what we see here from the left to the right, we've got two variants, which I didn't know that I mentioned before, but there's two different versions of the DSQD receiver, both with digital outputs and analog outputs. The outputs can be used simultaneously, digital and analog. This is the AES3 version of this receiver. It's got two TA type connectors on the back, and therefore it's two pairs of audio signals coming out of each one for the 4 channels that come out. Then the other variant, the original one we introduced last year, has the Dante, the RJ45 connectors in place of these here. So it's got the Dante Ultimo type outputs, and so far the Dante is much more popular, but there definitely are field mixers that take AES inputs, and by using these here, it's very convenient for those with those kinds of portable mixers. From Sound Devices and Aton and a number of other manufacturers. So this is the AES version. Then we've got the antenna inputs, antenna A, antenna B for diversity, the inputs here, as well as the loop through antenna signals here. So this allows you to loop the antennas to subsequent units, and you can have a total of 4 of these units running off a single pair of antennas. So from one pair of antennas, you could have 16 channels of wireless receivers in 2 rack spaces, which is very compact. Then, of course, we've got a DC power input, and I mentioned that before. So many of our customers are, of course, using these in the field, so they need them to be DC 12-volt powered. And then there is the Ethernet connection here for control and monitoring through the program Wireless Designer, which I will show you as well. Now, one other thing here that we actually haven't made use of yet is a data connection. This is a serial connection that can be looped through to multiple units. And the idea here is that they can share information about RF scans, so we could do coordination of multiple units without using a computer. So that's a feature that's on the drawing board and will come at some point. So that's the data connection, serial connection on the back of the unit. So let me flip it around here to show you the front and go through the details there. So on the far left here, we have the headphone volume jack, which is recessed and then can be popped out for use. So it's kind of nice that you would set it where you like to use it, and then it gets out of the way so it doesn't snag. And then there's the headphone jack itself, and then the control panel and LCD, and this is a high resolution color LCD, so it's very information rich. And we see the 4 different channels of the wireless receivers and the RF, which right now there's nothing going on. I don't have any transmitters on, but if I were to turn one of them on, you would see it show up there. Now we can see the battery voltage and the audio level coming through and the RF level coming through as well. And that would be the same on all these units. Now I can also press this channel button, and see a detailed view of this and actually begin to change the settings. Like here's the megahertz, kilohertz. If it's got group tuning, which we will get into, the type of compatibility mode, and I have this set as D-Squared, so it's going to talk to one of our digital digital transmitters. And then you can mute it, you can change your audio output levels as well. So all this in the detail screen on any one of these 4 channels, and to go to the next one, I can just press the channel button. So you can see that it's very easy to access the information and see what the settings are and monitor from this front panel, which is quite rich. Pete, do you have a question?
Yeah, there were a couple of questions about the back panel. When using the antenna
Okay.
loop out on the receiver, do you lose 3 dB each loop step?
No, it's unity gain on loop steps with this. So yeah, no loss.
And do the antenna loop throughs automatically terminate?
Yes. Yeah, you don't need to have a something plugged into that to terminate them.
And lastly, regarding the Dante version, can primary Dante and control port be on the same network, or are they separate?
They're separate. Yeah, that's a good question.
That's it for now.
Okay, great.
A couple more. Well, actually, can the front power switch on the D-Squared receiver be defeated?
No, this is a hardware switch, but it's got a guard. It's hard to see that here, but there's a switch guard, so it's very hard to turn it off. You got to be pretty deliberate to do it, to get your finger in there. So something brushing up against it should not turn it off.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for asking the questions. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is kind of get into the menu structure of the unit to show you what's going on here and what kind of flexibility it has. And first off, we wanted to set this menu up. You know, menu design is an art in itself and a real challenge, but we wanted to set up this unit so that it was very logical and easy to use without reading the manual, even though, of course, we encourage you to read the manual. But we've organized it a lot like contemporary products like video cameras and things like that, by group, by function, but we put a quick access in here for what we believe to be the most common things that people might want to change, starting with RF frequency. And here you can go to any one of the channels and alter the megahertz and kilohertz. And then when you get to this one, I've set up channel 3 to be compatible with digital hybrid, and digital hybrid units cover only about 75 megahertz, where this receiver covers 144 altogether. So on this hybrid unit, we've picked the A1 band to be compatible with that unit. So it's only going to tune within the band of that transmitter. The other 3 channels are the wide band, the full A1 and B1 bands together. So you can see it's really easy to go in here and manually change frequencies. And then the scan function, which has always been in our portable receivers since the last probably 20 years, starting with the 201 and the 411, 401, and those types of portable units have an RF frequency analyzer to see a spectrum analyzer, so you can see what's going on. And we see here between 470 megahertz and 614 or so that there's a bunch of DTV. And this is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we're not totally heavily populated, but there's plenty of stuff going on here. But you can zoom in on this and look closely and realize that there's actually quite a bit of room. And so it's kind of nice to have that RF scan available and then being able to zoom in and see where your carriers are. And if you want, you can tune them right on the spot. So for instance, channel 4 here, I can go ahead and tune it right here, just like that, just moving it. And then it will ask me if we want to keep that when I leave. So we'll go ahead and keep that new frequency. Group tuning, as I mentioned before, this is a kind of a shortcut to have a list of frequencies that you know you're going to want to use on that particular day or in that particular location. There's 4 user groups. Each one can hold 32 frequencies. So I've got it set up right now as none, but you could go through these one by one and choose group U, V, W, and X as well. And there's another place where you would set those groups up, and I'll show you that. This is still part of the quick access menu. So then sync settings, this is where you would use your infrared sync, and that's the window on the unit is right here under the power switch. It's a two-way infrared sync, which means there's a handshake. So if I were to sync one of these units, you would see it confirm that. So let's do that here. I'd already synced this unit before, and I'm calling this one Kelly E. And so we'll take the transmitter, hold it up to that window. Let's see, actually, let me do the channel 1. And there's a difference here between send frequency, which only sends the frequency, and send all, which is going to send all of the information, including the name of the unit. So that's one thing as well that you'll be able to see later how we would set up the name. You can set it up in Wireless Designer or in the receiver itself. So here, I'll sync this one up. This is channel 1, Peter E. And I'm holding it up to the window and go, and it says success. So it's kind of nice to see that handshake that yes, the receiver knows that the transmitter, excuse me, has the new settings. And then below that is compatibility modes. As I mentioned before, there's a wide variety of different compatibility modes that this unit can operate with, including the duet. So because these channels are mono, you're going to pick a duet audio channel 1 or audio channel 2. The North American hybrid, which is the old standard before October 2018. European hybrid, which has always been conforming to the ETSI standard. New hybrid, which is the American version now, which also conforms to the ETSI hybrid. In fact, new hybrid and EU hybrid are equivalent. There's a Japanese hybrid, which is specific to that country. And then the D-Squared, which is this native digital system. You can see the flexibility there. This is all in the quick access menu. Next down is RF setup. And this is once again where you would do your manual frequency tuning, your frequency scan, group tune, which I showed you earlier, and then group tune setup this is the menu that allows you to very easily add frequencies to a list. So here for group U, we can manually add these, or we can get them from a transmitter. So for instance, on this same transmitter we used just a second ago, we'll go ahead and hold it up and get the frequency from it. Okay, we failed. I see. It's looking for a group and there isn't one in the transmitter. So you know that that's possible. I think the DPR, this one here, is the one that's going to have the groups most ready to go since it's the newest transmitter. Okay, and then diversity setup. This is where we get into the meat of this unit. It's one of the things that's very flexible about the DSQD receiver is the fact that you have 3 different diversity schemes available. And I'll give you a quick summary about what these are and how they might be used, but there's a link in the handout that takes you to a video where this is explained in great detail, including some really nice little animations showing you the different methods. But a quick summary is that switched diversity is kind of our standard, using the 2 antennas and deciding which antenna has the better signal and choosing between them. This works in 90+% of situations and is most often what's used. Now, when we go to ratio, what this is doing here is using 2 receiver modules on the same frequency in the same compatibility mode. And then both of those are looking at both antennas. So in a sense, you're doubling up on the power. Now, I would normally choose this one in a more highly reflective RF environment where there's a lot of metal and things like that, where you might be concerned about that amount of reflection causing multipath dropouts. So ratio diversity is a powerful tool when you need it, which may not be very often, but it's in there if you do. Now then the most powerful method here, which is really a specialized thing, but might be perfect for what we could call the money channel, if you will, would be frequency diversity. This is where you have 2 receivers set up on 2 different frequencies that you've already scanned and chosen, and then you're going to pick up those 2 transmitters, each with their own lav mic, and decide which one has the better signal but you're going to have a blend of those two. So because it's blending them to give you the most solid signal possible, there is a calibrate step involved. So you have to match your audio levels very closely to have this work the best. So there's a calibrate step, and let me do that real quick just to show you. What it's going to give you is a little null diagram here, and then you're supposed to put a sound source into your two lav mics and look for the null. So you're going to adjust the level of one of them until they're both exactly the same. This is pretty easy to do by putting, let's say, pink noise through a pair of headphones and sticking your lav mics in there and then adjusting until they're locked. Again, I do show that in my video about the diversity schemes of the system. So we'll move past that now, but it's very powerful, and the results of using this are pretty amazing in terms of range. Obviously, with two different frequencies, especially if you widely separate the frequencies, they'll have a completely different set of multipath nulls. And so as the talent moves around and if there's obstacles in the way, this is rock solid, a good amount of distance past what most systems will offer. So that's a powerful tool. Next up in the menu is the audio setup. And Pete, you got a question?
Yeah, I wanted to catch up on the questions a little bit because we're getting pretty far away. Ivan asked, the D2 system transmit power tops out at 50 compared to the 100 and 250 of the older.
Yes.
He'd expect better range out of the D2 system since it's all digital, but will higher transmit powers come in the future?
It's hard to say. They're not directly comparable is one thing I want to mention. I'm glad that someone asked about this. With digital signals, because it's more like a square wave and you've got a much bigger peak to average ratio. Normally when you think of the power that it says on the spec sheet, that's going to be an average power. But the peak to average power in digital transmissions is much, much higher, particularly for the 8 PSK type of modulation that we use. Not all modulations have that great of a difference, but this one does. And so the power that you would be used to is maybe even a little more than double what the spec says. So if you're used to using 100 milliwatt FM type transmitter or digital hybrid, 50 milliwatts in the D-Squared is actually going to give you more range than that 100 milliwatt FM type system. So hopefully people will find that the range of these is more than they would need, but it's true that more power can be useful, and we'll see how it goes in the future with additional transmitters. But one of the challenge with digital transmitters is that you have to have a very linear output stage. So there's a trade-off from battery life to the power that's a greater amount of difference with digital systems than it is with FM type systems. So we'll see what we can do.
In the ratio mode of antennas, is it using either one frequency or the other, or is it combining the digital signal and picking the best bits out of both?
Yeah, now in the ratio, you're on the same frequency and you've got two receivers.
Okay.
And it's combining that output in the unit digitally to basically have a combination of what's coming through both receivers.
But it's using the best bits out of one or the other together.
That's right, exactly. Right. Then in frequency diversity, that's where they're on two different frequencies, and right. it's kind of like a combination of switched on each and then the frequency. So it's gonna, and the same thing there, it's gonna blend the two of them, a ratio of the two based on which one is stronger and has more integrity to the signal.
So it's not using both, it's gonna switch.
Well, frequency is using both as well. It's gonna be, like I say, a ratio of the two. The only one that is one or the other is the switched type, the most basic type.
Oh, okay. So ratio is also picking the best bits of both frequencies.
Yeah, ratio is, yes.
Right, okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
What's the black cable coming out the front?
That's a USB cable that I'm using to hook up to the Wireless Designer software. This can also be used for firmware updates on the unit. Okay. So yeah, sorry, I forgot. I skipped right past it when I showed people the front panel of the unit.
Okie doke. Does the receiver have programming via tablet or PC like in the Wireless Manager?
Yes, it does, and I'm going to get into that. It's called Wireless Designer. That's it's connected by either network or USB.
Got
Most
it.
often people would use it with a network, which would be more convenient. But for quick stuff like my little setup here, USB works nicely.
Does this system available in the 941 band or also in the duplex gap bands in the
This
700?
time, no. There's one version available. It covers from 470 to 614. And then if you select North American locale, it's going to restrict that to the top at 608 megahertz.
And where again is that IR port?
The IR port is here, just under
On
the
the
power
transmitter,
switch.
I'm sorry, on the transmitter.
Oh, on the transmitter, it varies, but let's see here.
Like the one you were doing before.
Yeah, on this one here, the IR port's right there.
Oh,
On the
okay.
top of the unit. So you can face it to this IR port and still see the display when they talk to each other. So that's kind of handy. On the plug-on, it is here. So once again, you could, in theory, match them up and still see the display.
Does manual frequency tuning do any intermod among the other frequencies that are there?
No, manual frequency tuning is going to be pretty much straight ahead, where you're going to have a list of frequencies that maybe you pulled from IAS or Freak Finder, some kind of app that will
like
give you.
when you were showing, looking at the slots, the empty holes in the spectrum, and you were just picking another frequency. So obviously you have to do your same intermod calculation on that.
Yes, you would. With Wireless Designer, of course, it's going to have a coordinate function, and I'll show you that as well. And that's going to do those intermod calcs, and it's got a lot of power in it.
And regarding NU and EU hybrid modes, does it deal with deviation so it can use the USA and EU hybrid transmit at the same unit at the same time?
Yes, it does have to do with deviation. The old standard in the US allowed for plus or minus 75 kilohertz, and then that was obsoleted in October 2018. They grandfathered it in. You're still allowed to use it. But we're not allowed to sell new systems with that much deviation. So the new ETSI standard is plus or minus 50 kilohertz. So that's what new hybrid is all about. EU hybrid was always 50 kilohertz. So EU hybrid, new hybrid are the same, but NA hybrid is the older one. You can mix and match channels. So you could have a unit on NA hybrid, a unit on EU hybrid, and so on.
Scott Farr points out that to be clear, you can run both Dante and remote control on the same network, but they run from two different ports on the DSQD.
That's a good clarification. Yeah, I appreciate that, because
showing his remote system today, and they're using long distance over public internet.
Yeah, I'm going to show a slide with that, and it's great to have Scott watching and commenting, because he knows more about that than I do. But yeah, that's a good clarification. It's two ports, but it can be run over the same network as long as the network has the capacity. And oftentimes people want to use some kind of subnet. But yes, it's two ports, but it can be in the same network.
Will the specs on the new digital plugin be available online? Not currently on the website, John Christie.
It should be, yeah. The new plug-on, the specs should be there. It's the DPR. When I was looking for it earlier, it was there, but I'll double check it. I mean, if it's not, we'll make sure it does get there. I mean, the specs are available. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
And is there a QoS display, quality of signal display?
There is not. That can be accessed for diagnostic work by the engineers, but it's not put out there as something to look at directly. But that's an idea. Let me take a note that we might want to include that. I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, because QoS is interesting, because often, even when your RF level has gone way, way, way down and it's almost gone, you still have a usable signal, and the only metric is your QoS. So
yeah, the data is certainly available in there. So let me talk to the guys about including that. That's a good question.
Okay, that's all for now.
Okay, signal, good topic. Okay, so now we're in the audio menu, and some of this is pretty straightforward. Doesn't need a lot of explanation, but here is the audio level, where you've got individual meters on the channel, and you can adjust your levels up and down. And these go, let's see, they top out at +8 dBu and all the way down, I believe, to -50. So there's a lot of range there in 1 dB steps to match the input carefully. Then you can mute And here is something nice too, is a tone. This generates a tone all the way up to -20 dB, and that allows you to calibrate stuff downstream from it. And I know that in one of the online chats we had recently, how important this feature was. I think it was the Audio Opinion show the other day, but Ike Zimbel was talking about this, and it allows you to get audio into any device downstream for calibration. So then here you can move around to the individual channels and do these same setups.
Does that tone stay on until you turn it off, or does it time out after a short period of time? Because you might forget you've turned it on and be feeding the cameras.
Yeah, it is manual turn on and off. Yes. And let's see, one thing that we might find out is what happens if it, yeah, it turns off when I leave that screen, Peter.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, see, it's automatically shuts off. I think we learned that lesson a while back. Then audio polarity, positive or inverted. Smart noise reduction is something that at this time is only available for the hybrid compatibility modes. This was originally developed in the digital hybrid days in the early 2000s because the RF channel noise was so low that you could start to hear the hiss from the lav mics. And so people wanted something to reduce that. And this single-ended dynamic noise reduction does that. And we thought the digital stuff is so quiet that maybe we don't need it, but we've got a couple people that have asked for it. Again, with very noisy mics in the front end, it might be a handy feature. So we'll see. It may end up on the digital modes as well. Here's the compatibility modes again. We saw this already. And then here is the TalkBack setup. And this is going to be easier to see when we look at Wireless Designer, but it is available right here on the front panel. And essentially what this is doing is when you enable it on a channel, and then you enable the transmitter with its programmable switch to be TalkBack, when the switch is actuated, the audio goes out to whatever channel output you have determined. And so you can decide which channel has this output. Now, it should be evident that it's going to sacrifice one of our outputs. So if you want to use all 4 channels, TalkBack may not be the right choice, but it's a handy feature for many, many things. And I've been amazed by how many people get excited when we talk about TalkBack and the capabilities here, depending on what they're doing with it. But you guys have a question?
What if you're using the AES out to feed your show? Can you use the XLR out to do TalkBack and not sacrifice an output?
At this time, no, but we're looking into that. The idea right now, they're mapped 1-to-1, so whatever's going to output 1 goes to output 1 of the digital. But we're looking at that. That's a good question.
That was my question too. Can we access AES? Can we access Dante? Obviously Dante'd have to be a fixed route, and controller. But I love that feature. That is very cool. So good. Pete asked my question.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so with the handheld and the belt pack units, you can set them up as TalkBack. And as I said, it's been a great feature for a lot of different types of users. Okay, so that's our audio stuff. You can see the depth, that flexibility here with just the audio side. Next up is infrared sync and encryption. So here's where we sync our settings, and I showed you this already in the quick access menu. But here, for any of the digital ones, you can send just the frequency, or you can send all of the information. So you can choose that. And then if you've already got a transmitter programmed and you want to grab those settings, you can get all the settings, which then bring it into this unit. And so for instance, let's say you want to mirror a unit or have a backup unit that's already set up with all these settings, including the name, including the frequency, and whatever other settings might be in there. Get all will do that from a unit. And then you could send all to send it to the next unit. So it's a good way to clone units if you want to have a backup ready to go for your CEO or your money channel. And then here's where I'm going to send my encryption key or get a key depending on the mode. And so these are grayed out because we're in universal mode right now. And so this is where I choose my key type. And I mentioned this briefly before, but universal, all these units come from the factory with the universal key already in them. And it's a single key that's in every unit we sell. And so to be able to tap into the signal and hear what's being said, you'd have to have one of these units. So if someone had a scanner and was able to demodulate the APSK, but doesn't have our key, they wouldn't be able to hear what's being said. But if they were to buy a unit, then they could do that. So that's where the other two key types or key policies come into play. I talked about this with you guys a little bit pre-show, but this is the shared key mode, which was developed specifically for sports. And what this allows you to do is share the key between units, which is kind of a no-no for long-term key protection. But for something short-term, like a play in a game that you only need to keep the key secret for 15 minutes, let's say, this is a great way to share a key between units, including between receivers. So you might have a receiver in the rack or in the truck, and you might have a camera mount receiver for roving cameramen with the key shared, and then they can all pick up that signal from a transmitter and decode it. So shared key is a really nice feature that's unique, I believe, to our system. Then standard key is what you mostly think of with encryption. This is where you would generate a unique key, and then it is kind of a one-to-one relationship. The key is generated in the receiver, it's given to the transmitters, and then that's it. It can't be propagated any further. So this is the most protection, and but it's not often needed necessarily, depending on the type of work that you're doing. If you're doing, let's say, government work where you want to keep the secrets, you want to keep the signal secret for a long period of time, this is the one you want to use. And then you can change it at any time and resync the units with the new key, and now this key is no longer valid. So that's the most powerful type. So that's the three different types of encryption and that you might choose in this system. And you can see it's a tremendous amount of flexibility just in that area alone. And then we get into the tools and settings that are a little bit more kind of universal. And because we're in the business of field production, this is a feature that will save battery power if you're not using all your receivers at once. You can actually turn on and off individual receiver modules within the unit. Then there's the transmitter battery type. And with the hybrid systems, the previous generation of systems, you would choose battery type based on, at the receiver, and the receiver's looking at a type of signal coming from the transmitter that's embedded in the pilot tone. But with the newer units, you can actually send data directly. So you set up the battery type in the transmitter, so you get a more accurate measurement. So that's where you see these on channel 1 grayed out, and only this one that's set up in a hybrid mode is going to give me the option to choose what kind of battery it is from the receiver. And that one I have set up in hybrid, and the transmitter I have synced to it is a SSM, which uses the LB50 type rechargeable battery. So next up is transmitter battery timer. It looks, I can see that it's probably hard to see this on your screen. There's a lot of information here, but essentially what's available is the ability to set a threshold of time after which it's going to give you an alarm on the screen showing you that your timer has run out. So for instance, with some types of rechargeables, they have a very flat discharge curve, so it's hard to measure the voltage. But if you know the battery lasts for 6.5 hours, like the case of our LB50, you could set, let's say, 6 hours on the timer, and when it gets to 6 hours, you're going to get a warning. And then there's also the ability to reset this once it's gone off. So kind of a nice feature, a confidence factor for certain types of work and certain types of batteries. Next up, front panel setup. This is where you determine how bright the LCD is, and I have it set at 50%, which is kind of easy on the camera. But you can see if I start to brighten it up to the full brightness, it kind of washes the camera out. So for this purpose, I have it set at 50% and always on. And then I can lock the front panel. And this is handy in a rack type system in an installation where you don't want anyone coming up and meddling with it. So you could lock it out, and they'd have to come in and know that this is in the menu somewhere to unlock it. Along with the power disable for individual receivers, I can also do that for the Dante module or the AES module. So this is another power saving thing. If you're not using the digital outputs, you can power down that module, and it'll actually tell you here that it saves 0.16 watts. So there's some engineering guys behind that, obviously, that kind of nomenclature. So good stuff. Then antenna bias power. For anyone using amplified antennas, you want to be able to send a bias voltage up your antennas. And so here I'm going to go ahead and turn it on for this channel, and we see that the LED on the front panel lights up, telling you that that antenna is now powered. So that's handy. Then here's the network settings. If you're going to connect this on a network, which most people probably will, you can do DHCP, which will automatically ping the router and get an address, or you can manually enter it. And so it depends on the type of system and if you want to work with your IT guy and get that going. And then here's where you could edit the names. And I went ahead and named receiver channel 1 Peter E and receiver channel 2 Kelly E, but you can name it whatever you like. And then you can determine whether or not you want that to transfer over to the transmitter, or if you want the transmitter to have a unique name. And this can also be done in Wireless Designer software. It's certainly easier from the software because you got a keypad versus trying to use the buttons here, which takes a little bit of time. And then you can restore defaults. And for some diagnostic work, pilot tone bypass, of course, on digital channels, that's not going to be the choice. Digital does not have pilot tone, but for any of the hybrid channels, you can bypass pilot tone and do some diagnostic work there to see what happens. Now, the locale setting, I think I mentioned this before, but this helps the receiver know where you want to truncate the frequency tuning bandwidth. So for North America, it's going to, in this band, the A1B1 band, covering 470 to 614 in the hardware, this locale North America will restrict it up to 608 at the top, so that it's not automatically picking frequencies in TB37, which is off limits to us at this time. But you could say you're in Europe, and it will look at those frequencies. And over time, there'll be more locales added to this as well. Then the hardware status. This is just for diagnostic work, looking at the boot of the various systems. And then here's your about screen telling you your hardware and your firmware, your serial number. So this is the kind of thing that if someone is calling us, asking us for help with a unit, we'll have them go here and look at this and look at the firmware and hardware version and the serial number so we can help them. And then one last thing that's kind of cool is we put 3 QR codes in here. One of them takes you to the Lectrosonics website, one takes you directly to the user manual, and one takes you to our YouTube channel to see videos about this product. So, and I saw Scott Farr briefly on the screen. Any questions about what I've shown you so far? Peter.
Couple of questions.
Okay, shoot.
Early on, we had a question about whether or not you're going to make any AVB units in the future.
At this time, we don't have plans to make AVB units. Dante has been proving successful for us, but
Right.
you know, we're always listening, and if the need arises, we'll certainly consider that.
John Christie did find the specs under digital wireless, not under transmitters.
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking we need to relabel our website categories now that we have a full line of digital products, but I'm glad he found it there.
Now, you told us that the talkback feature can't be separated with the AES output. Does that apply to Dante as well?
Correct. Right now it's 1-to-1. So the outputs on the analog outputs are going to be 1-to-1 for the digital outputs.
So if I'm using Dante outputs though as my main output, is my XLR available for talkback, or is that 1-to-1 you're talking about?
That's the 1-to-1 I'm talking about. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So you've seen me sync up the frequencies with the units, and you see how easy it is. But just to show you like a hybrid unit here, I'm going to go. One thing I didn't show you was from the front panel, the monitoring screen here. We also have quick access. You know, what you saw there was that I had to dig pretty far into the menus to get to my infrared sync. But what I didn't say was that you can do a quick sync just by long button push on a particular channel. So here's my hybrid transmitter. I'm going to hold it up to the infrared window, and a long button push is sending my settings, and it says IR sync. So now this unit is synced up to that channel. So that makes things much, much quicker than having to go into the menus to do that. And there we go. I've got, now that's set up on frequency diversity, and I've only got one transmitter going, but you can see how easy that was just from the front panel. And likewise, if I was to go into the detailed view of these channels, I can also do that here simply by pressing and holding the channel button from here, sending the settings. And it's sent and I'm IR synced, so there we go. So real easy to do right from the front panel, so it makes it much quicker. So I hope everyone's clear on that function. All right, what I think I'd like to do now is get into Wireless Designer and show some of these features from that point of view. Peter, question?
Two more little questions on this before we get there. Does
Okay.
the power DC pull change from analog output XLR and Dante output mode? DC
No,
power draw?
It doesn't. If you've got your digital output powered up in the unit, and you can turn it off, but
Right.
if it's powered up, you have outputs coming from both the digital and the analog simultaneously, and so there's no difference of power, but you can turn it off, in which case then it would draw less power.
And does this receiver decode 400 hybrid signals as well as the Venue 2?
Yes, those are the same signal. That's all digital hybrid, and you can choose if you want the NA type hybrid, which we used from around 2002 to 2018, and then everything that came after October 2018 is the NU hybrid or new hybrid. So it does all of those.
Okay, that's fine.
Great. Okay. So now I'm going to jump into showing Wireless Designer and what's going on there. So here's our view, and this is the home screen, if you will. I've connected. This is the place where you connect, and I connected via USB. You could connect by network as well if you had that set up. And what we're doing here is monitoring these 4 channels from the unit. This software will allow connection to up to 99 frames of anything that's compatible with Wireless Designer. So that includes the original Venue wideband, that includes Venue 2, that includes the DR, which is our encrypted system from 2014, 2015, and it includes the Duet system. So all these things can be connected and monitored and frequency coordinated together, which is nice. So let me take you a little bit through what's in here. So right now I have my session view, which would show us on the monitoring screen anything that's connected to it. I can expand and contract these so I could fit as many as I want on a single screen. And if I go beyond the size that it'll allow for, it's going to start putting them on separate tabs. So it depends on the size of the screen that you have and what you want to see on a particular screen. But this gives you some flexibility for zooming in, seeing the details. Next down is going to be my frame view. So right now I only have one frame connected, but you would see multiple frames if, for instance, you had multiple DSQDs or DSQDs and M2T duet transmitters. They would show here, and I could look at each individual one. Below that is my settings, and this is where we can name the frame. So this is, let's say, Practical Show Tech. That's the name of my frame now. Front panel, here's where we could lock it out and do the same settings on the LCD. Here's our encryption type, network settings. So this is a lot like our tools and settings menu in the DSQD receiver itself. Here's our antenna power, here's the tuning groups, and here's our versions of firmware in case you want to check this against our revision history to see what's in the units and if they're up to date. So all that's available in the settings over here on the left. So another thing that we can look at is frequency scan. So if I've done a scan on the receiver itself and these units are connected, the scan data will show up in this pane. We can also clear it and do a new scan if we like. And once we've done a scan and we feel that it's good, and you can see here, there's my speaking my carrier for the unit I'm using here. And then we can export this to the frequency coordination page, where we can look at it in greater detail and see how it relates to our carriers. So right here, we can see that we've got 4 carriers, and as you hover over them, it'll show you their names and what frequencies they're on. And then you can actually move them just by clicking on them and dragging them. And this is kind of a cool exercise if you ever want to see the relationship between the intermods, which are these orange bars are your third order intermods. And as I move these around, you can see that those intermod frequencies are going to move. So it's a good way to illustrate, how intermods relate to your carrier positions. And as I click on these, they're showing up in this list here on the top as to what's going on. And this is where you see specifically the frequency, what kind of step size they are, if the power is on to that receiver channel, and I can also lock them. So one way to do frequency coordination is simply to drag these around until there's no conflicts. Now, if I start moving these and they get too close to each other, they'll conflict. Or if the third order intermods step on each other, or if they go in a place where there's more RF signal. How they determine whether or not it's a conflict with a background RF is by setting this threshold bar. Normally, I like to set it as low as possible while still leaving some area beneath it to fit my channels. So now we're down probably at 4 dB microvolts, which is very low level. And if I can coordinate my frequencies with that kind of noise floor, I'm in great shape. And then there's automatic coordination. I'm not going to do it, but it's very fast, and it will coordinate all the connected channels that are not locked into where it believes there's no conflicts with not only the background RF, but the intermods. So it's very handy to use this system. Now, one thing I can do too is import scan data from a file. This is a really powerful feature that was added pretty recently in the software, but what it allows me to do is to find a file that's scanned data from another location or another date and bring it in and look at it and see and overlay it onto what's there. Now, I just imported this and noticed that it's pretty similar, although now I see there's a new DTV channel right here that wasn't there a couple months ago. So that's something interesting to note. So I can also export these, import from file, and export it to save it for later use. So there's a lot of flexibility here also. And one thing we haven't talked about is custom channels. This is a feature that lets us bring in channels of wireless that we, let's see, discard changes. I'm going to.
Quick question before we leave that
Peter.
screen there.
Yeah.
Can you import channel names and or frequencies, import or export from a CSV file? Let's say they came off of another list.
Yes, that's exactly right. You can import them from a CSV file, and that was added recently as well. So that's on the import custom channels. So it depends on what you want. Import scan data, you can import that from a CSV file. I think I didn't show it, but
no, I mean actual. Let's say you have a list of frequencies, not scan
yes,
file, but list of frequencies.
That's right. Yes,
import them.
Yes, you can. So here's from an IAS file would be where that list would come from, and that's basically creating. I believe it's an HTML list as an example, and that's here. Import custom channels from file. So this is where I would determine. And I can import those from an IAS coordination report as an example.
Right from the HTML coordination report?
Exactly. Right. So that's there. And that's part of the custom channels function is bringing in, like I can manually add these, and then I can also bring them in. So if I were to import that IAS list, it's going to treat them as a custom list of frequencies, just like what you described. And then you can merge them with your hardware. So your hardware would then take on the frequencies of those custom files. So
and what format are the scans coming in on?
We have our own proprietary format, but you can also bring in CSV.
Regular CSV. Okay, great.
Yes, and there's a couple different formats I believe that you can choose from. But yeah, CSV, we've been doing a lot of tests with that recently. We did find a bug. A European user found out that because of the European use of commas and numbers, like they have a dot after the 1,000 and a comma for the decimal place, that it was kind of doing some funny things. So we recently corrected that as well. So custom channels, if you've got some units that are not connected to the network, like let's say older units of ours that can't be connected to Wireless Designer, like IFB transmitters, other brands of products. Let's just say IFB1, and this is a block 19 system. I'm going to create this custom channel, and now it's going to exist on my list of channels. And it can be considered in the frequency coordination. So whereas the standard carriers are going to be the darker blue, my custom channel is a lighter blue. It defaults to locked, but I can unlock it, and now it can be considered part of the coordination. So I can manually move it as we did before, or I can do the automatic frequency calculations, and this will move along with that. So, and it'll only move within block 19 since I specified that. And if you know the range of other types of products, let's say the Shure J1 band, you would put the upper and lower limits there, and it will also only tune within the range available to that product. So this is, all part of custom channels. And again, you can import those lists of custom channels and then merge them. For instance, here, I can add, let's see here, what I want to do is merge with custom channel. Now we're going to say that that one is IFB. I'm going to do this here with the channel 2, if it's available on that block. There we go. So I brought in a custom channel from a list, let's say, and I'm going to merge it with my hardware to make the hardware conform to that frequency that came in on a list. So this is pretty easy to do. When you get to large channel counts, it does take some time, obviously, but it gives you a great amount of opportunity to have lists come from different places and then merge them all so that it's all interoperable with your hardware. And it's all coordinated together with the intermod calculations to make sure there's no conflicts.
Now,
So that's go ahead.
Michael asked a question: how is the importance of frequency coordination change when all the wireless is digital? He says, I have seen other manufacturers advertise when even channel spacing and no more need for coordination in regards to IMD when digital. That's not entirely true. At full power transmitters, you do need to intermod coordinate digital transmitters only in low power with other transmitters.
Yeah, I agree with you, Peter. That's a good question. It does come up, and I think that it goes back to what I mentioned about digital transmitters having very linear output stages.
Right.
If you've got a linear output stage and you're running them at a very low power, oftentimes the intermods are very low. They're still there, but they're very low and maybe inconsequential. In which case you could do things like stack the transmitters closer than you might if you were using higher power, for instance.
Right.
But the one part
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. One thing that I'd like to mention, though, is that most of the time when we're talking about intermods, we're thinking about transmitter to transmitter intermods. That would be if two transmitters got close together on stage as two actors are nearly touching, or that type of thing. But it doesn't take into account any intermods that might get generated anywhere else in the system, like in your amplified antennas or your RF amps or your receivers or your distros. Any active device can generate intermods. So if you've got your gain structure completely perfect, which is often not the case, then you can mostly discount that, but it doesn't eliminate it altogether. So intermods are really a case of the degree of them or the amount of the level. It's never zero, but it might be very low, just to clarify that.
Back in your frequency coordination screen, why is the scale in dBUV when everyone else uses dBm?
I am not certain of the answer to that one, but I will pose that question to our engineers.
And then Frequency Finder, can you import or export lists from Frequency Finder into this?
If they're in CSV format.
Yeah, I don't know if Frequency Finder does CSV.
Not sure. I'd have to
Yep.
check. That's a good question. I'll make a note of that as well. Freak Finder, okay.
And then on the display module screen, can you view multiple modules on the screen, meaning like 6 RX from Venue 2 and all 4 from D-Squared simultaneously, or what's
Yes,
the
you can.
size of the screen?
Yeah, it's really about the size of the screen and how big you want it. But I mean, if you watch me shrink these down so that they'll all fit on one line as an example, you can see that it'd be easy to get, let's say, 24
Right,
channels on
right,
one screen. You can definitely put them on there. Yeah. It's just going to be screen resolution dependent on what you can really see.
right.
Great questions. Okay. Go ahead.
Did this same app come operate on iPads?
We do not have an iOS version of this. We have a
Right.
Mac OS version and we have a PC version, a Windows version, both available for download. We had heard a rumor a while back, and I don't know how far off this is, but I guess Apple's looking at converging their iOS
2
with their
years.
Mac OS. So it's
2
still
years.
years away, you think?
2 years, yeah. The
Years.
Mac,
Okay.
the iPad, and the iPhone will all use exactly the same software in 2 years.
It does make sense. I think that'll
Yeah.
be great for developers. I mean, and that's really our limitation is we're a little bit resource constrained. We've got the small team of engineers and developers and software folks, and they do an amazing job. They do really nice work, but to maintain 3 different versions of this is just a bit too much, unfortunately. But I usually use I use a Surface Pro 3 as a kind of tablet/laptop, and I know a lot of people use that. It works fantastically. In fact, that's what I'm on right now with this unit. But yeah, we're looking forward to the day when iOS and macOS converge, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay, other questions? Okay, I'm going to dive into the details view of each of these channels, and you can see what's going on there. Hold on, before I do, note that you can also mute directly on one of these as well, and you see which channel it is in a frame, and the fact that it's yellow tells you that to keep an eye on it. So now we're going to dive into what we see in the detail screens, and here once again, you can determine whether or not the module is powered or not. You can name it. And as I said before, very easy to do that here. You can manually change the frequency. You can put it into one of the tuning groups. If you like, you can determine the diversity. And here's our talkback function. And let's see, I think I'm going to go ahead and do this on this unit. I'm going to determine that talkback comes out of channel. Let's see, let's keep it in 2 for now. Easy enough to show. So I've enabled that. I'm going to my transmitter into its menu. And now I'm putting it on talkback so that they're both ready to be used in this fashion. And so what we see here is that channel 2 is designated talkback output, as I just selected it that way. And now if I actuate the switch, it's going to have the audio go out of channel 2 instead of channel 1. And this is very quick. It happens in a fraction of a second. It's about, I would say, less than a quarter of a second to see it go. And so again, very, very handy. This is available with the bell pack. Yeah, go ahead.
One bell pack working with 2 different frequencies?
It's not changing the frequency. It's just sending a command code in the digital stream telling it to switch the output.
Except that you're taking the Peter E transmitter and pushing the talkback, and it's coming out the Kelly E output.
That's right. You're going to have it come out of one of the other outputs in the receiver. So you would pick which one.
Even though, even though Kelly E is a different frequency, it's using the second channel out for the talkback from your channel 1 transmitter.
That's exactly right. Yeah, notice that the RF doesn't change. It's still coming in channel 1, and there's nothing on channel 2 RF-wise. Only the audio goes over there.
So what if the Kelly E transmitter is turned on?
It would have the audio out until the talkback is engaged.
Okay.
Yeah, from that transmitter, you'd still see the audio until I engage that switch.
So the talkback can come out any channel, even a channel that's not associated with that transmitter, which makes sense because you'd want the talkback to go to a different place.
Exactly right. Yes, you have it. That's it. All right, getting back in here. So a lot of the functions that we saw in the menus, including invert the audio polarity, which kind of compatibility mode, if there's noise reduction on it, audio level, and audio mute. So this is the receiver tab of this detail view. We can also look at transmitter tab, and here's where you can determine if I wanted my transmitter to have a different name. I could uncheck this, type in a different name. I went ahead and had it pick up the receiver channel, which is typical. There's your battery timer alarm, your battery selection, which is grayed out for a digital transmitter. And then here's our infrared sync functions: send key, send settings, get settings, and close. Now to go between channels, all we need to do is hit one of these arrows and it takes us to the next channel. So you don't have to come all the way back out, go into the next unit. So here's where let's see, we put this into frequency diversity. I'm going to take it out now and put it back to switched. And you can see compatibility mode on channel 3 set to new hybrid to work with an SSM transmitter. And then we get over to channel 4, which was, because it was set up with that other unit, now we can put it back to D2 type compatibility. Okay, and again, the transmitter settings, same thing, you can hop between them to look at all these different things. Okay, so that's the detail view per channel. And
One
that's
more
where you're
question
gonna,
on talkback.
yeah, go ahead.
Could you have could you have, let's say, 3 transmitters all feeding their talkback into the 4th output?
Yes.
And they
Yes,
could,
you can.
if they all talk back at the same time, they would all get mixed together?
That's right. They'd be mixed at their whatever levels they're coming in at. But just to see that, so we're going to look at this one here, and we're going to set this one up as talkback, and we're going to set it up to go to channel 2, just the same. So those two now are both set up going to channel 2 as my talkback output. All right, other questions? Okay, let's move on to,
Go ahead. Actually one. Can you combine frequency diversity with talkback functions if you have 2 different transmitters on 2 different frequencies, but the first transmitter has the ability to output, I can't read the whole thing, has the ability to output talkback on the 2nd channel?
I don't know. But I'm going to make a note. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
TB output, frequency diversity. I don't think so. I think we talked about that, but it started getting a little sticky because frequency diversity is really like using 2 receivers as 1 receiver with redundant outputs.
When you're using 2 receivers as 1 receiver, the output is coming out both channels together at the same time, identical?
Yes, that's how the outputs are set up now. So I understand the question that could we use a second output as a talkback output? Possibly. Let me look into that. That's a very interesting question. Any other things before I move on?
Nope.
Okay, great. So a function we haven't looked at yet is the walk test recorder. And this is the function that is by frame. So you'll only see the tab when you are looking at a particular frame. If I look at my stack or my whole session, that tab goes away. So just one little bit to remember where it is when you're looking for it. So walk test recorder allows us to determine, choose a channel and then record the results of that channel. Let's see, this is PST test. We've created a file, and that's where this information is going to be stored. And then we're going to start recording and see what is going on this particular channel. Notice there's a couple different types of information. Let's see, is it running? Doesn't look like it's. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so it's showing you the RSSI, which is basically your radio level. It is showing you the diversity state of that channel, and it is showing you the audio level of that channel. You can also actually record the audio, but you need to get it into your computer somehow. So a common way that you might do that is to take the headphone out of the receiver, put it into your audio input of your PC, and then it'll record audio as well. And that's kind of handy if you want to describe where you are in a given location, like if you're on a stage and you're walking around, or in a studio. You can say, okay, I'm at the far left corner. Okay, now I'm downstage right, and that kind of thing. But this really gives you the ability to look for problems in the location by walking the transmitters around one by one. So then I can stop this, I can play it back and look at it, and then I can determine, I want to look at channel 2 now and do a walk test record for channel 2. So very, very powerful function that's really handy when you get to a place you've never been, and it's a good way of diagnosing any potential problems with your antenna setup as well for your receivers. You might be in a shadow and not realize it until you walk into a particular part of the stage. So this is the walk test recorder. Yeah.
The transmitters don't output GPS data, do they?
They do not. That's an interesting idea though, huh?
Yeah, so you can see where the dead spots are physically, although you wouldn't be able to use GPS on an indoor event anyway, so.
Probably not, and it may not be precise enough. I mean, it should get you within a few feet or a couple yards, but I don't know. That's scary to think about including all that in these little battery-powered units. Of course, they do it on a phone, so maybe it's possible. Okay. One last thing I'd like to show, unless there's any questions about this particular function, is a couple of innovative uses of D-squared systems. And Scott Fars is listening, I know, and has had some comments already, so I'm going to show his. So let me just change over here to.
Before we leave,
yeah, go ahead.
Is there a way for the button on the transmitter to record a marker on the this screen as you're walking around?
We don't have that capability at the moment, but that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I will. Let's see. Program switch marker.
So if you couldn't record, you could at least press the button when you were stage left, press the button stage right, sort of thing.
Yeah, very interesting idea.
And just to let you know, Karl, if you wanted Scott to explain something, he can turn on his camera and mic.
Okay, very good. Thanks. I wondered if we might do that. Yeah, so that's great. So I'll let him talk about his setup here. Let's see. In fact, we'll jump to Scott's now. So I saw this picture on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and of course I had known Scott was working on something interesting because he asked about getting the rack flanges for one unit, and so he could mount his antennas on the front of the receiver and do something cool. So he's got a sound devices recorder here and a DSQD digital receiver. And what he told me was that he's using Dante long distance over public internet for this project. The talents wearing are hybrid transmitters, the SMQV, and with lithium batteries, so they run all day long. And the production is remotely monitoring this in another city. He said using Unity Connect and Skype Talk Show, and apparently some secret proprietary software as well, which we can't talk about.
Yeah, Dante doesn't actually work over public internet, but Unity Connect is a way to transmit 64 channels of Dante over the regular internet.
There you go. Yeah, so if we want to bring Scott in to comment on this briefly, before I get to the other two case studies, if you will. If there's any questions for Scott about this that he is allowed to talk about, I would imagine he could have some detailed answers.
Hey, Scott, welcome.
You need to turn on your microphone, my friend. Unmute yourself.
There we go. We're going to unmute. There you go. I just did it remotely.
There you go. Yeah, it said I was locked out.
Oh, there you go.
No problem. That's a pretty cool setup there, man.
Yeah, I think, Karl, the screenshot you had disappeared for the kit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I can, you want me to put it back up?
If you could share it so you don't disappear, that'd be cool.
I don't know. I think when I share it, I disappear.
No, you'll still be there. Go ahead and share
Okay,
your. Share the
There we
PowerPoint.
go. Yeah, there we go. Let me get to that slide again. Okay, we good?
Here
Yeah.
we go.
I don't think this is the most current photo, but basically there's a mount that was custom made by a local vendor here in Los Angeles that holds the DSQD directly to the top of the sound device's 888, so they don't separate, they don't disappear. And then it also puts some space between the two because they both create a lot of heat. We hooked up the system in a small rack mount, and there's like a Mac Mini, an Apple Mac Mini that this is hooked up to with the software on it. Oh, just to remind people, I tried to send a message earlier, but it wasn't going through. There is a third-party iPad app for the Venue, and it's called Pocket Venue. It's a paid app.
I forgot about that. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, Pocket Venue. Yes.
It does work. It doesn't do everything, but it does work. But it's, you know, it's an option. I don't think there's an Android version for it, but I do know there's an Apple version. But back to the setup. Go ahead, Karl.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Very cool. Also, recently, you know, with COVID-19, there's more interest in these bag drops, where you might have a receiver set up and maybe an IFB transmitter or M2 type transmitter or something close to the talent, and then it's being monitored from some distance away. And another cool app I saw was with Cujo Cooley in Atlanta, and his handle on YouTube is Atlanta Sound Mixer. But definitely take a look at this. He's got a video where he explains this, and he's been using our DPR now for the past several months with a DSQD in this sort of bag drop idea. And then the control is run over long cables and monitored remotely. So he mentioned to me, by the way, that the whole video was recorded with the DPR just on its micro SD card, and you can tell it sounds really nice and clean. So that's a cool video to check out. He's got a couple of videos about this concept. If you want to learn more about that, check out his YouTube channel. And we saw Scott's rig, and then sound mixer in LA, Devendra Cleary, let me show pictures of his latest rig. And this is one of the most powerful looking rigs I've seen lately. He's got 20 channels of wireless in the main cart there with 2 DSQDs and some original venues in there, as well as IFBs and some other things with his Aton setup there. So, and then he can pull the Kantar and the DSQDs out in a modular center section of the rack, and then on the right you see that set up separately. So that's 8 channels of digital wireless with the mixer recorder, and then he's running his wireless designer on that computer. So lots of cool stuff that people are doing with these, and it's always really exciting to see how they're actually getting used. And these are just a couple examples. I'm sure more will be coming.
Yeah, we were able to have the producers. They're in a completely different location using that Unity Connect. Some of them are on iPads, some of them are on iPhones, some are on laptops, and they can dip in at any time and solo those channels and listen to specific audio feeds. And it's all over public internet. It's a very clever use of the technology.
Absolutely, it's very cool. I appreciate you giving us some insights on that system, Scott. Always good to chat with you.
I learned about it from some guys in Europe where they did a live music performance. I think Karl, you'd be interested in this. They had musicians in different cities, and they said it took them about 10 minutes to adjust for the delay so that they could start playing ahead.
Wow, that's I don't.
So one guy was in New York, one guy was in Glasgow, one guy was in Berlin. I think the majority of the band was in Berlin.
Yeah, I've been seeing some more things like this, and apparently there now are some quote-unquote real-time collaborative platforms out there. They're subscription only, but they're using high bandwidth internet, and I'm not really sure how they're accomplishing real-time, considering the conversion latency and then all the other things that the signals have to go through. But we're getting there. Slowly, we're getting there. It's really cool to see.
We found that Skype is pretty good. It's pretty aggressive at grabbing as much bandwidth as it can. It sort of pushes other stuff out of the way, and it prioritizes the bandwidth as it needs to. And it's been pretty aggressive, and it's been a real trooper. The program they use is called Talk Show, which I think is a skin over Skype.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
But yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing today, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Farr.
No problem. If you have any
Awesome.
questions, let me know. I can hover.
Cool. Okay. I've gone through this thing in a lot of detail, but I'm opening up the floor to questions now. If anyone has comments, questions, anything else that I missed somehow, or if they want me to go back through anything, I'm happy to do that.
No new questions yet. I think
Okay.
we pretty much answered a lot of questions. A couple of people made a comment. It's thinking theoretically in a quad versity unit with 0 gain loss on each antenna, you could calculate where you were on the floor, but that's.
I see. Using. I understand what they're saying.
The other
Comparative
thing is which I'm going to do a webinar on not too far in the future about the format of the CSV files are slightly different for every different manufacturer, and need a little bit of massage, like you say, comma versus period. The resolution on the frequency, they do either no decimals or megahertz, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, it drove our guys nuts, but at this time we can import most of the major types of formats from the different types of machines. We've tested it with everything we could find, and it works right now. But yeah, they had to go through all that and figure all that stuff out.
Will there be a digital SM transmitter in the foreseeable future?
Define foreseeable. Yeah, we're looking at all those things. I mean, people want smaller transmitters. We're certainly aware of that. We've got a lot of things in the pipeline. It's can't really talk much about it, but we hear you.
We won't tell anybody you talked about it. It's between us.
Right.
There's one more question here. I have to see what it says with my old guy's eyes. I'm glad you guys haven't gone into a pairing type configuration for the TXRX like other manufacturers. Any notes on that?
Yeah, I think that's more in the case of using other parts of the spectrum, like the 1.9 gig DECT band requires pairing, some of the 2.4 gig things. That's more the types of chipsets that are being used and the way that they're handling the spectrum. And we're not getting into that. It's really more traditional wireless, if you will, but with the latest kind of transmission receiver technology. So yeah, no pairing. You could have as many transmitters as you want or receivers as you want coming off of a single stream. Of course, only one transmitter at a time going into receiver, because you could have as many receivers as you want picking up the same stream. For instance, duet, you could have one transmission going out, and I know of users using 40 receivers for like dancers or backup singers or correspondence or video village or the different types of uses for those things. So yeah, no, we're not pairing them. They can pick up that stream, as long as, again, if it's encrypted, you need to have all of them need to be synced with the encryption key. But other than that, no problem.
And your transmitter for bag transmitting with 2 channels in it, those are totally 2 separate transmitters, not left-right stereo?
No, this one is going to be one transmitter, so it's going to emit one RF signal, and that's part of the advantage of it.
Stereo signal with
it's
subcarrier, right?
Digitally multiplexed, essentially, so that you've got 2 audio channels, embedded in a single signal on one carrier. So, and because it's digital, you get greater than 80 dB separation between channels. So it's as if they are independent audio channels. So for instance, you could put 2 different IFB feeds, and the people listening on either one of those feeds is not going to hear anything from the other one.
Now, can it be used as regular stereo transmission?
Absolutely. Yeah, this
Yeah.
was developed on the Duet in-ear platform
Mhm.
originally, which is exactly that, a stereo platform.
Right.
So in a sense, comparing this to Duet, the Duet M2T is 2 stereo transmitters in a half rack. This is 1 stereo transmitter in a belt pack type configuration, but it's exactly the same platform.
Right. Have you tried using Wave Tool on the Dante units or with that?
Yeah, our stuff's Wave Tool compatible,
Yeah.
starting with the Venue 2 and now DSQD. There is Wave Tool modules for that. So yeah, we've seen a number of systems using Wave Tool to monitor our receivers. Yeah.
No new questions. We'll see if any more comes up here. That Wave Tool was from John Christie.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, John. Hope all's well up your way.
Yeah.
I had a question about to go back to that encryption point for a second, Carl.
Yeah.
If
Sure.
I have my 2 receivers, right, and I'm going to pair that up when I go to my the receiver like you did, and I pair that and I've got it on shared, right?
Yeah.
So I synced up this transmitter. Now I go over here to my camera, right, and I want to sync to that. The transmitter now has that information, right? And then
Yes.
it's telling this receiver, hey, it's okay for me to now share my key with you as the receiver over here, correct?
Yes. You got it
In that
exactly
mode.
right.
Send it
When
from
you're-
the transmitter to the other receiver.
That's right. So when you would, let's say we set this transmitter up with shared key policy, that's where it has to be set. Then we generate a key in the receiver and the DSQD, send it to the transmitter. Now I can share this key, and it's in the menu. You just go in, share key, and do the infrared sync again with the new receiver, and the new receiver now can listen to that same signal.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
I can just keep doing that down the line then.
Exactly right. For as
If
many
I want.
receivers as need to hear that transmitter, they can all share that key. Exactly right. Yes.
Are the antenna loop throughs only work with D-Squared, or can they go to an analog receiver as well?
Yeah, they work with anything that is within the bandwidth of this passband. So in these particular receivers, between 470 and 614 megahertz is the hardware filter set. So as long as it's within that passband, no problem. RF is RF. You could come in, the antennas go out to the next unit, and it could be some different type of unit. One of our portable receivers, a Venue 2, you name it. So you always want to go from the widest to the narrowest. So for instance, Venue 2 has a 9-block range. And so you would start with that, go to this, and then go
Because
to something
loop
like an
through
SR. Yeah.
is band limited for the device it's plugged into. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, no problem. But
Yeah.
you only want to do it, your cascade shouldn't have any more than 4 units in the cascade is one thing, because each time you go through those filters, you get a little bit more ringing on the edges. So one of the tricks that I've seen for people that want to push the limits, and I've seen as many as 6 units stacked, is what they do is the top unit in the stack, they're using the frequencies near the edges. And then as you go down through the stack, you get close and closer to the middle where the filter is still linear. There's none of the ringing. So there's a tip and trick for you.
Oh,
Okay.
so band planning for your loop throughs.
And planning, one of my favorite 2 words that I ever say. Amazing we didn't
Nice.
talk about band planning until now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think that's a feature that we've kind of come to really appreciate, that loop through. But it always, like everything in electronics, everything comes at a price. You can't, you don't get unlimited loop throughs. That's just kind of how life works.
That's right.
okay.
Physics is physics, and this is electronics, and it's analog until it's not. But to jump onto one thing about band planning, so here we are. Now we're going to suddenly talk about it. But one of the things, more and more of these systems are wideband tuning. So for instance, our Duet system goes from 470 to 614, and our D-Squared platform goes 470 to 614, and the transmitters do too. So now you've got these transmitters that will cover that entire range. So how do you band plan? You know, in the old days, you would say, okay, I'm going to use a block 19 for my IFBs, and I'm going to use a block, 23 for my talent mics, and then maybe I'll stick a voice of God mic in the middle somewhere, and you keep everything separate. Well, Wireless Designer, a feature that is very close to coming out, and I was looking at it the other day and proofing it, is going to be custom ranges, where you specify, okay, my D-squareds, I'm going to set all those up to be only covering A1 and a little bit of B1. And then I'm going to go into my duets and I'm going to have them be only the top part of B1 as an example. So even though they allow you to tune across the whole thing, now we have to kind of go back and restrict the ranges that we're wanting the systems to tune to. And so then when you do an automatic frequency coordination, everything will stick within these restricted ranges. So you can band plan right there in Wireless Designer. So that'll be a real nice feature. It's coming out quite soon.
Oh, absolutely. That's great. The that's again, I was talking to a few people last week because we're throwing around this idea of the history of RF. We're putting together a webinar around that, and the what got us here.
Yeah.
And today, man, I mean, we have so many luxuries, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
But I think as we're looking at this and we're scaling up, and especially where you get into very large scale events where you have and we will again have numerous press, and we'll in those areas, just because you have it doesn't mean you use it that way, right? Sometimes that they be working in a smaller footprint actually brings a lot of benefits with it. And the same reason I'm so big on encryption. These are feature sets that bring a lot of benefits with them, but don't bring the same cost of performance that we're so used to in the past, right? And we did band planning because the device was restricted. Now it's the opposite. We have this really big playing area, but now we have the ability to be very strategic, and that gives us a better outcome long term. So all these tools together, I am so thankful for what we can do today that 25 years ago, imagine.
Impossible. Yeah,
right, exactly. Impossible.
or unaffordable, or impossible to use, but you'd have to cobble together kind of disparate pieces. Now, I mean, the feature sets available in today's wireless are just staggering. But you make a great point. In fact, the idea of going wideband was something that our engineers kind of pushed back against, like, well, there's downsides to going wideband because now we're seeing so much more RF energy through the passband of the system, and that's bad. So what we're starting to advocate more and more is attenuation and filtering. So even though you've got units that are wideband, you might restrict the range in Wireless Designer so it'll only tune over a particular range, and then stick a filter on it to keep everything else out, because there's so much garbage out there and the noise floor is so high. And so we just sent out we sent out something on our website called Wire Lists. These are like, top 4 tips of how to avoid intermods, or things like that. So the latest one that we did is actually about filtering, showing examples of a 25 meg passband passive filter and how much power you can get just with that by keeping all the crap out of the receiver front end. So yeah, it's funny how things kind of come full circle. It's like we long for the days of helical filters where you one frequency and man, nothing else got in that receiver. But the drawback was only one frequency available. If it was getting stepped on, it's over. You put it back in the box.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think you're muted, Mac.
Yeah,
there
if
you
you
go.
just limit yourself to 2 wireless mics, intermod's not a problem.
Right.
The one of the things that I thought was interesting with the question around power, right? And I've had a hard time convincing my brain of this, that I don't need the same amount of power in the digital world. That there's not a true equivalency, like this equals this, right?
Not exactly, no.
We got a window, right? But I've really come to embrace the low power, just enough power, in fact, kind of philosophy. It's like, why I don't need even 10 milliwatts Now, I'm not proposing that the FCC restrict us to 2 milliwatts.
Please, no.
We don't need that. But we're using it responsibly, folks.
Right.
The idea that I can be very efficient and use what I need, right? This idea of being able to recognize, look, if I only have to go this far, I don't need 100 milliwatts to go 35 feet, right? Now,
Yeah.
let's be honest, we did that because I wanted a big boot, right? Normally, if I wear a 10, I might wear a 10 and a half, but you know, when I go to show site, I want to be in a 13, right? Just because I want my footprint, right? This is me, this is my mic. I'm not going for distance. I'm kind of I perceive I have this elbow room, right? When I have power,
Yeah.
but with digital, I don't, right? My elbow room stays exactly the same, right? That footprint, if you will,
Yeah.
except when we get into very low power things. And I think this is some of the stuff we have to condition ourselves to and trust that, you know, we hear a lot of times, trust the science, right? Of course, around all the COVID stuff. And I would say you have to do the same thing with digital RF. You have to trust that that math works, right? It really, you know,
Yeah,
the
I think
QoS, right?
I think the ultimate proof of that you don't need that much power was Alteros, the late lamented Alteros. That was power level below the noise floor, and it worked.
Sure.
Someone's
Yeah.
sharing their screen. It's like backdrop here.
Yeah. I'm gonna. Yeah. There you go. But you know, yeah, the whole power idea, and I think going forward, you know, being able to apply that where we need it, because there's obviously applications where we need those very high power situations,
Sure.
and we can do a ton with power management, with the band planning, lot of options. So anyhow,
Yeah, you know, along that point, there used to be kind of more different philosophies between different manufacturers based on their user, you know, applications. And Lectrosonics was always kind of leaning on the high power with what we call the circulator isolator in the unit to cut down on intermods, even though using high power and so on, because they're often used outside with not controlled conditions. And some other manufacturers were using low power and highly selective receivers and so on. But we've seen a convergence that now everyone has to have wideband receivers. They have to have multiple powers available on their transmitters, so it's selectable. I mean, our modern transmitters do like 10 milliwatts, 25 and 50 in the digital, whereas before it would have been, let's say, 50, 100, and 250. And yet the functionality is very similar. Although, like you said, it's not exactly equivalent. You know, you can't say that 10, 25, and 50 digital is the same thing as 10, 25, and 50 analog. It's not. Different kind of signal.
mm-hmm.
But we've seen this convergence that everyone's basically had to add these selectable features to be able to remain flexible enough to be used for the various applications that they might be used for. And you know, it used to be just totally specialized. You had a drag racer, you had a car that would go super fast in a straight line and terrible in the curves. But now we see cars that are more flexible. I don't know if you guys seen that. There's a video where they race Ferrari 308 against a Camry. You know, and it's a good example of showing how modern cars, even with all these convenience features, are ultimately faster than something that's 25 years old. You know,
I'd
so
still
there you
rather
go.
own the 308.
It's way cooler for sure.
Yeah,
You get a
we
lot more
certainly do.
get a lot more looks driving down the street in one of those things.
There was a couple of interesting questions here. Can you talk about phase shift keying versus FM and if it affects the antennas at all?
It does not affect the antennas from our point of view. RF is still RF, although the signals look different. Those antennas are picking up electrical signals and they're picking up radio waves and turning into electrical signals. And so the antenna, really, it's got to be tuned to the right frequency range is the key thing. But you're noticing that for the most part, digital antennas, if you want to call them that, are the same. Yeah. It's just what kind of design of antenna you want to use for the application.
I think anybody selling a digital antenna is selling you snake oil. There's no such thing as a digital antenna.
Like, remember the digital interconnects from the old days? They were RCA cables that were
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have this special digital phono cable for you.
Now, until we come out with the practical Showtech digital antenna, in which case it is no longer snake oil, and we'll expect everyone to buy our digital. antennas, just so
Yeah,
you
of
know,
course.
optimized
Um,
for digital use.
When we're
Is
ready
there
for that.
any concern about compatibility with LT transmitters and D-squared transmitters in regard to the TA connectors for the lobs, existing lobs? Are they the same wiring?
Yeah, same wiring. We've had the same wiring in our lobs. Anything with a TA5 in it since around 2004 or 5 when we introduced the servo bias type. That was the last time we changed that input. But yeah, anything wired for either compatible or servo bias only will work with any of the modern transmitters.
Does the encryption policy allow multiple transmitters to have the same RX?
And
Yes.
he specified one at a time.
Yeah, you've got to have only
yeah,
one transmitter on at a time, but yeah, for that channel. But yes, you can have multiple transmitters that are all set up with that key. And then,
So
first
it
of all,
doesn't force you to only read, you don't make a new key every time you put a new transmitter on. You can use the same key.
yes, you can. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And it's the same key on one frame. So for instance, all 4 channels on a DSQD are going to give you the same key, even if you generate a new key in the standard mode. So you can have as many transmitters as you want synced up to that and ready to be turned on, like backup units. For the 4 channels, you could have one transmitter on and then a backup unit on the same frequency with the same key. Transmitter A dies, transmitter B turned on, ready to go.
And if you had 2 transmitters on the same frequency, how much headroom does one have to have over the other before you start getting your signal through?
Oh, like we were talking like FM capture mode. It's not exactly the same.
No, but it's digital. But I mean,
It's digital, right?
At
So
what point does one become noise and the other is the signal? 10 dB?
probably roughly in that range. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you use a D2 transmitter with a duet receiver?
No, at this time you cannot.
Right. And lastly, does the UMC 16 multicoupler still work with the venue and D-squared?
Yes, that's another example of RF as RF. And we now have newer versions of the UMC 16B that cover only the A1 and B1 bands, as an example. So in general, you want to keep RF out. And now that there's new 5G services starting to show up, we want to keep that stuff out, like from T-Mobile up in the 600 band, out of your front end and out of your distro and out of your everything. So we've got the ALP 690 antenna that offers that filtering as well as attenuation. And then you come into a UMC 16B that cuts out everything outside of A1, B1, and then into your receiver. So you've got a really nice filter set with all 3 of those things going on.
So if you need more than 16, you could start out with that to split your signal. And
more than 16?
More than 16 loop through.
Oh yeah, exactly. You could come out of one of those into several front ends and then stack from there. So yeah, with a single one of those, you could have, I don't know, 64 channels, something like that.
I'm thinking of 80 or 200, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the more the better. We love it.
Yeah, mics don't have to be social distanced.
Exactly. They can be right next to each other.
That's right.
Sure.
They're in phase 10.
Worked for me.
Awesome.
Well, I think we got through all those questions and we got
here.
all the details. Wow.
Yeah, some great questions. I mean, I love hearing people's ideas.
Curiously, they were mostly very good questions. It's a high
Excellent.
percentage of good questions here.
They seem like people that not only know RF, but in many cases know our products quite well.
Right.
And so it's pretty specific questions that they had. But yeah, I'm glad to have those kinds of questions.
We've got one more digital device we have to talk about, though. This.
I was waiting for this.
That's right.
This covers the entire bandwidth, all the way from dry to super wet. Comes with an antibacterial spray with the incredible PST logo on it. And this is a little gift we're sending out to donors who donate more than $25 to PST to support our effort. we've had about 30 people so far begin our donation program, and really appreciate all the effort that you do to make that money to give to us. So
Awesome.
thank you very much.
Yeah, so thanks, thanks, Karl, for being on, bringing a great, great topic with you. Folks, you know, keep in touch with Karl. You got his email on the screen here. That's one of the coolest things I keep saying that's come out of this whole thing is the connections we've all been able to make across the industry, because we've had this, unfortunately, we've had time, and fortunately, we've been given this gift of time. So, I'm very optimistic about the months to come. I'm going to stay optimistic, and I'm jealous of a couple of those pictures with that those racks. So now I got gear envy, and I'm going to have to go back online and start searching again. But thanks again, Karl, for the time you put into sharing this with us and bringing this to us. And you know, we'll look for future opportunities, obviously, that we're going to be having you back, and we'll continue these discussions. And you know, everybody have a great weekend, and keep staying safe out there. We'll be back on show site before we know it. Meanwhile, enjoy the mask, enjoy the hand sanitizer, and off we go. So
Wash your hands.
Everybody keep wearing your filters. This is a high bandwidth filter.
That's right. Yeah, it's wide tuning. So
Wide
it's all
tuning,
good.
but very sharp on the edges. Exactly.
Yes, perfect.
That's
Thanks so
right.
much for having me, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Karl.
Karl.
So long, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take it easy. Bye.
All right. Bye.